Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this is the 407th meeting of the New York Comics and Picture-story Symposium. This is a weekly lecture series, reading series founded just over a decade ago by Ben Catcher, a cartoonist and educator. My name's Austin English. I'm co-curating this calendar of the symposium with Ben and Bill Cardellopoulos, Lily Correa, and Danny Fingeroth. And I am incredibly excited for tonight's talk. When I was putting together my part of the calendar for this season of the symposium, um, I know that tonight's guests, James Romberger and Marguerite Van Cook, have spoken to the symposium before. James himself, I think one of the early planning meetings for what the symposium would become a decade ago, I think James was at one of those early meetings. So they've been associated with this series a lot. But I specifically wanted them to speak tonight and discuss specifically this book they made, 7 Miles a Second. Which they did in collaboration with David Wojnarowicz. And I just feel that at all moments in time, but maybe this moment in time specifically, I've always had such affection for this book since I read it. I guess in when it came out in 1996, and in rereading it recently, my affection for it has only increased. I truly think it's one of the most significant works of comic art in terms of the beauty of it, just the visual beauty of it, um, what it stands for, the story it tells, how unique it is, and in how it, there's a lot of works of comic art that deal with political themes, but I think that, and hopefully we'll get at this a little bit more closely in our discussion. I think that this one gets at it, gets at what it approaches in such a fascinating and incredible way. And if people have not read this book yet, I encourage you to seek it out. If you've read it in the past, I encourage you to read it again. But I really did want to do one meeting of the symposium where this book is discussed directly. And as someone who encountered the book without knowing anything about the backstory of it, I still don't know, but I myself don't know any of the details of how it came to be. It's if you've read the book, the fact that it came out from such a large corporation that published it seems almost inconceivable. So I've always wondered about just the background of the book and our two authors tonight, their personal thoughts on the book. So without further ado, I think we can get into. I have some questions prepared for James and Marguerite, but I do think, especially if people are fans of this book, this is a great opportunity to ask questions of these authors. And part of the spirit of the symposium is to encourage participation between the audience and our presenters. So if you have a question, please do not hesitate to ask it at any time. You can put it in the chat. You can indicate in the chat if you'd like me to put you on screen or if you'd like me to just read the question for you. But I think I wanted to start things off by quoting one of the panels in the book. And the book deals with David Wojnarowicz's early life and then his the reality of him living with AIDS in America in the mid 90s. And I wanted to quote this panel that happens early on in the book, where a young David Wojnarowicz, I believe, who's 10 years old at the time, is witnessing two people having sex, and and one of them has wounds, and what is written what it says in this panel is what really twisted my brain was how that guy could fuck that woman with those fresh wounds staring him in the face, like he couldn't conceive of pain attached to the body he was fucking. Now, what I wanted to maybe start off by asking you guys before we get more into uh, the circumstances of how the book was published. This this to me seems like one of the central pieces that repeats itself throughout the book. This inability for people to their people's own pursuits and their inability to conceive of deep psychological and physical pain that other people are experiencing. And that surfaces here, and I think it surfaces really clearly later in the book. I wonder when you guys were approaching interpreting this work graphically, if that's something that stood out for you, or maybe something else more significant stood out for you as a central part of the book, and how you approached it graphically with the themes that you encountered.
Uh, well, thanks, Austin. I appreciate your regard for the book. I feel honored. I'd say that I mean, it became clear at the end of the process that the main theme of the book should be empathy. So it's kind of bookended that. I mean, I when David really, worked out that first part with me, sort of like a little film. So he gave me a pile of material, and then he said he wanted to do this thing about going and being picked up by a guy and getting taken to Nathan's and then ending up in that hotel room seeing that scene. So that, we found he had these like monologues he would kind of copy down. I don't know if they weren't really transcribed. I don't think he was tape recording them, but he might have sometimes tape recorded like these monologues people would blather on like street people. He'd hear them. Anyway, or he'd write it down later. And so we had to kind of edit some things together. So the thing is, I had discussions and like he worked out the first part together, then we worked out the second part together, and I had a little bit more latitude because that was really more mixes of dream. He used to keep a pad of paper next to the bed in the morning, and when he'd wake up after having a weird dream, he'd write it down. So he had a lot of that kind of thing, these dream journals. So the second part where he's like teenage and homeless, he had he had a lot of material that we could draw from, and I kind of edited it into a form that was workable to kind of like, oh, here's what he wants to have happen in that part. But then I had to find bits that would get us to where we wanted to be, and that would actually work in a comics form. We'd had discussions about the third part, and I kind of had an idea what he wanted, but he died before we actually got to actually putting it together. So I had to choose from the bits of writing I could find in his journals and all this other stuff. And this is all kind of before Marguerite was really involved in the art part of it. I just had to make some decisions, and it seemed to me that properly bookending that first part, which really comes down to the fact that he's just so pissed off that not only his trick is oblivious to, and he's about 12, baby. It's intolerable anyway. A little kid getting a blowjob like that, and I didn't draw it very literally, so you're really not seeing like it's pre-censored sort of. But the guy, his trick is oblivious to what being forced to see, and then the woman's trick is also oblivious to her pain. So that's an empathetic crisis right there. So I felt so it seemed right to me to bookend that black, like the empathy theme, by putting there's a scene right at the end uh where David's sitting alone in his apartment, and I call him on the phone. It's me on the answering machine there. So, and I go, "Oh, David, are you going to pick up?" It's like, "Oh, well, okay, I guess not. I'll see you later." Well, I didn't see him later.
Mm.
It's really me, and I'm trying to get through to him. And his comment, like in the caption right there, is like, I'm just so tired of talking to people that have no idea where I am. I'm the one going through this shit. And then he goes like, he even talks about himself in the third person. He goes, David feels pain being alone. There's nothing be, there's nothing can be fucking done about it. It's like, so he's hit a point of complete disempathy where nobody knows what he's feeling. And it seemed like it was the only way I could end it, really. He had said, "Oh, I wanted to end with a nice day. I'm just walking around in the sunshine and happy to be alive." Well, there was nothing in his writing that would allow me to do that as a scene. So the only concession I could do was kind of later in the second edition. I did a thing where there's a page at the beginning of the third part where he just goes out he drives out into the woods and finds a little lake or something. And he used to say that yeah, I think Marguerite asked him, like, what did you do with your money when when you were turning tricks like that? He goes, well, I'd drive out to the country and then I'd go walk into the
The
water
bus.
until up
He
to
was
my
too
knee.
little to drive. He caught the bus. He would take the bus.
Take the
Because
bus.
he would take $5. And I said, where did you with $5, David? What did that do for you? And he said, I got on the bus and got out to the country.
Yeah. Then we
Such
do him like,
country.
floating under the water, kind of communicating with the turtles or whatever. But that's David. He liked animals and things and like that. So that was that last page in the second edition. Really, that's his little happy day. That's what I could do. I couldn't think, hadn't thought to do it earlier on for the first edition, but
I mean, one
yeah.
of the things that's really interesting about the piece that you mentioned, first of all, where he's looking through the crack in the door, and it's really a consummate outsider place that he's put himself. Even as a child, he's right in the lineage of L'Enfer, Henri Barbu's, of Colin Wilson's, the outside. I mean, he's in that lineage of being an outsider that young, yeah. And what was so interesting to me is he's not really thinking about himself within that. I mean, he's still thinking about other people. So you still have this amazing distance in his perception. One of the things that I thought was that sticks with me is right at the very beginning of the book. He said, "And my little legs were hurting," and
Mm.
that was like that hurts. That particular line.
Yeah.
So he goes through all of these things as a child, but that's the most childlike, moment where he's actually experiencing himself, back as a child. I mean, what's so interesting about the way the book happens is he's simultaneously being a child and then writing it as an adult, so it's yeah, it's really got a lot to to grapple with.
Well, that detail
But
you
when
bring
we
up.
did that,
Well,
Oh,
yeah, so some
no,
of
I'm
these
sorry.
oh, sorry.
are definitely decisions that I made or we made, and you try to make the thing, you try to make it into a book. I mean, it's kind of like David had a lot of disparate material and he had some ideas that were very solid, but then it was kind of left a little ephemeral. So I had to make it work as a, I mean, not everything makes a good comic. Comics kind of want like, some cool action scenes. So, I threw the dreams gave me a chance to do, you could do kind of surrealism in comics. So that works pretty well.
You
And
know,
you want some kind of spectacle, I think. And so we put that in, and I got the spectacle in, and I got the human stuff in, but also then the really quiet things is just a thing about empathy like that. That's quiet, but it's in there, and it's in there pretty solidly. So
So for
so
you, oh yes, please. Sorry.
we went to that hotel room is something we saw. So we
oh
were
yeah,
off.
yeah.
I went and
When me
stayed
and
in some.
Marguerite met, we were crashing on different places in New York. We went to some hotel room in it, and I pulled back the top cover, and there was, I'm like, what the fuck? It's like disgusting, like a cat was murdered on the bed or something. What the hell is this? It's like a pile of guts or something all dried out. It's like, oh my God, this is disgusting. And in that particular hotel, the bottoms of the doors were sawed off.
Mm.
And it was like, what the fuck? This is like, you're not safe. Somebody could crawl underneath that. It's
Yeah.
like ridiculous. It was like a sleazy time. I mean, Times Square really was this hideous, sleazy place not that long ago, So it's,
But for you, getting at that, for you, you're describing it as empathy. For you, the graphic approach was in how you sequenced it. Like that's because that's you weren't working obviously from a direct script.
yeah.
So it's just interesting to me that the first thing that comes to mind for you is not necessarily how you drew it, but how you sequenced it. But I really think what Marguerite said about that line where his little legs hurt. I just, having
Well,
just
David did
read this.
write that line. I mean, and I probably have it on a piece of paper someplace that he said, "Oh yeah, right, my little legs hurt." There's a lot of the writing that's in there. Some of it you can find in his books in different forms, but a lot of it is just specific to that book. So, especially that first part, we just worked it out together. The second part, there's a lot of that. They're not really anywhere else. It's only the third part that really drew a lot from material that's in other places. But just because I needed to have, I needed to have material that would get me to where what we were talking about. Like he'd say, ooh, I want you to draw me on Fifth Avenue smashing things. Well, smashing what? Okay. Well, at that time, Dave, like around that time when I kind of stopped being able to have meetings with David, is because he was very, very involved with ACT UP, and they were doing they did protests. They did one big protest at um St. Patrick's. So, okay, here we go. That's what David would be smashing is St. Patrick's. Like it just was such a logical
Yeah,
leap to do that. Of course, then Marguerite did something like when she colored it, she didn't do like, ooh, the dramatic King Kong lighting really, or any of these kinds of
right.
things you might have assumed. She put the colors of the rainbow on the fucking thing. So then it was able to be used. I remember they had some kind of protest up around St. Patrick's later after David died, and they made some kind of Marguerite. What was it? They made a window in Saks Fifth Avenue or something with David's work in it or something.
Bendel, Bendels, yeah,
And,
Bendels.
and then we made stickers of that picture from smashing St. Pat's and stuck it around on the windows of this building right next to St. Pat's.
Bendels, Bendels.
Perfect timing. But oh, come on, you're gonna yell here, please don't.
That that line is so I think gets at like talking about his little legs hurting. There is, I think, this kind of effortless pain of David's writing. Like there is, it's never overdone. It's never it's stating it's stating the tragedy of this situation so directly, and the pain that you feel to me when you read it is it happens effortlessly. You're not manipulated into it at all. And I think the graphic approach that you guys take is it is so it's so sophisticated in capturing that. And I guess I wonder if with such sensitive material about someone that you knew representing them graphically, I wonder, yeah, I guess I'm kind of wondering what approach or how you thought about that when you were so close to this material, deciding how you wanted to translate it into pictures, to do justice to how painful it is and to do justice to the actual events that are depicted. I wonder, looking at the material closely, how you thought about that.
Um, that's really what you.
I mean, well, for me, by the time I was doing it, um, we were, it was really tragic circumstances.
Well, you could
And
talk about certainly how you went about your putting that color on and mixing the watercolor with the.
yeah, so I mean, this is going to sound insane, but we used to play a lot of Gene Pitney. And Gene Pitney, and back at that time, we were drinking quite a lot as well. And because a lot of people were dying, there was a lot of dying and drinking, and a lot of tragedy. And we would put on Gene Pitney and basically put it on to cry. We'd put this album on it, we would start crying. And and so there was this sense of heightened emotion, and I went there a few times to make the artwork. I was like, I really wanted to be in that, in the horror, really, in the horror of it. And I mean, so it's not traditional color, obviously, but it was meant to be experiential and have
Yeah,
some of
I mixed the watercolor with tears. Okay,
the, it's a
and
bit
I showed
lyrical,
you
Dave.
not about that. It was like you're working on something. Your friend has died not that long ago. It was very difficult for me to draw the bloody thing, and you're very conscious that you're doing your friend and trying to do honor to their intention, and trying to make it like accessible to people. So, the decision to have Marguerite do the color was really she won that fair and square. I got in the middle of some other, I had always intended to color the book, but I got in the middle of some other work and I think I broke my foot or something. Jesus, I broke my foot. And so then I had this other job for DC and I was like, well, I wanted to color the book. Well, you know what? Maybe Marguerite would do a good job. Let's see. And she did a couple pages of samples, and they were so fucking amazing. And they're in the book. I mean, I think the first page and another page, they never were changed. They're straight into the book,
Well, I
because
think
it's
that's
so unusual what she did, and a kind of a super emotional response, and it goes outside the color, outside the lines, which,
Yeah.
I would be much more anally retentive at doing like my kind of usual Steranko type Mobius or whatever the fuck that I like, you know what I mean? But and based on surface color or something, and then light applied to surface color type thing. But Marguerite didn't adhere to any of those kind of rules, and it's fine, and it's way better than the way she did it.
Like,
So
I mean, and I really have to say, I spent a lot of time, not a huge amount of time, but enough time discovering weird kids' palettes, like I would go and buy kids' paints, to get these colors that didn't exist in sort of adult worlds.
yeah, it had like
And
glows
back
and
then it's interesting. Certain colors came into our sphere of consciousness in the 80s, in the late 70s and the 80s. We didn't have Dayglow orange, we didn't have Dayglow pink as an everyday color. These bright acid pinks were not sort of part of an everyday lexicon. And so I decided I was going to use some of these colors that kind of were frowned upon, which sounds strange to think about it now because they're so seeped into what we use every day. But at that point, they were, sort of unusual. And when they went to get printed, they didn't know how to read them. It was one of the weirdest things. I think the person that was doing the color for us at Digital Chameleon, he like tried to do the color, the orange kept coming back pink, and I kept saying, no, it's orange. It kept
people read
coming
colors
back
differently. Yeah.
pink, and people are on a different color spectrum visually as well. I slightly colorblind. I was like,
Well, that's so exciting for me to hear actually, because that's part of, I think the subject matter of this book is revolutionary, but that's why I'm spending so much time asking you guys about the graphic approach, because I think comics struggle with just things that other visual arts have already dealt with 100 years ago. The idea of the color expressing emotion, express like the expressive art movement in terms of the color of the comic is something that comics, especially from a mainstream publishing house, truly struggle with. I mean, you're describing they didn't even have the technical language to translate this kind of color, but it's so perfect for. I mean, it's beyond. It's exactly how the work should be colored.
Well,
And I think, yeah.
we should probably just talk briefly about the process of how this thing even got to print. I started it with David in maybe 1986. So at that time, there really wasn't graphic novels per se. There was only a few. But we always saw it as this kind of really it's more of a novella. It was like a 50-page book, and it would be, he called it the comic book. So, well, he wanted it to be accessible to teenagers. But then, the story was a bit kind of an adult material. If it's like underground comics, you're supposed to be 18 or whatever the hell it was. Anyway, I didn't really expect it to go to DC Comics. Okay. I'd done the ink drawings. I did 2 pages of color for a dummy, my own color.
Well,
And
can I interject and ask you to just go back to even before this, how the idea even.
well, David just said, like, we were working, we were showing David in our gallery. We had a gallery called Ground Zero. And we're coming in sort of we were in the East Village through the whole time, but we kind of started late, a bit late in that scene to run our gallery. We did 3 years, and David did 2 shows with us. Okay. And we worked with us because he liked our work, and he also liked that we gave him complete freedom to do what he wanted. And especially his first show, it was completely unsaleable, like a giant mess with corpses. So, I mean, I could show you all this stuff. I have like some images, but I started talking to him at some point. He knew that we'd done that. We were doing a comic strip ourselves, me and Marguerite, in the East Village Eye, and so he kind of had an idea that we could do.
It wasn't just in these villages. We had this brilliant idea to do. The strip was called Ground Zero, which was the same name we took for our gallery. And I had the brilliant idea that it shouldn't be easy for people to read comics. They should.
Thanks
So a
for
lot of theory going on here in my, fetid brain, as they say. And that it should be put in different publications every time, and that it shouldn't be easy to find, what happened next and they should all stand alone and
purposely obscure.
really purposely obscure because, that was the onus had to be put onto the reader. it shouldn't just be an easy read, and all of this stuff about interaction between the artist and the reader.
I don't know that David really was aware of that kind of stuff, though. He just thought,
I
oh,
think
we
it
can
was
do
because
comics. Because the comics look like comics. He was like, oh, it looks like commercial comics, so that's good enough for me.
Mm.
He didn't think he could draw well enough to do it. He himself did make some comics, but they're these fucking doofy. Like he took Archie comics and cut them apart and turned and for Tommy Turner's Red Drum magazine, there's a whole Archie story, and it's basically he cut it up and repasted it together. So Archie and his friends were like the Manson family, and they murder Mr. Weatherby and that lady, whatever I forgot her name. It's just really disturbing and disgusting. So this is what David did left to his own devices. Like this, he's like, well, I can't really draw properly to do this, so you can draw properly. So can you do a thing? It'll be my life, me as a kid, me as a teenager, me as an adult. We started before he was even diagnosed with AIDS. So AIDS wasn't in the equation at first. He was worried he had it. And we had discussions about it, but originally it wasn't going to end with him dying. Okay. It was just, he said, me, whatever. So we didn't get that far. We just started working on it. And it took me, I don't know, it took me a while. I went to Belgium. I inked the first 10 pages in Belgium. And we got it, actually when I came back, I showed it to Art Spiegelman because he'd liked some earlier thing of mine. He'd wanted to put me in Raw. And I was like, well, maybe he'd like this for Raw. He's like, no, it's not really his style for something about it. I don't know. It creeped him out or something. But he goes, send it to my friends at El Vibora in Spain. And so I did, and they published it. So that the first time it was published was in Spain, this first part. And then it ran in World War III, but David didn't really want to do that. But then the second part, it took me about a year to draw the second part, at least. And I kind of farted my way. I was doing other stuff. He's doing other stuff. We weren't in a big rush with it. But then, we had a few meetings for the third part, but then he got sick and he got involved in like all these lawsuits and the Reverend Wildman and all this shit going on, like being censored and all this stuff. So we really didn't get much of a chance to talk. And then he went pretty quick, really. It's too bad he couldn't have held on just a little bit longer because he might have hit the triple therapies they have now, and like he might have survived if he just lived
Yeah.
a year, or if he hadn't taken AZT, which knocked him,
I
knocked.
mean, David had been reading Foucault at that point. That we had James. I I'm a French scholar. I have a PhD in French for my sins. Why we don't know. But and so I was all excited about Roland Barthes at that point. I was like all into that, and so I would sit and talk to David about all of that. So James he doesn't know what he thought about the comic, but I think David was pretty much aware of different ways about thinking about production and
Yeah.
meaning.
Well, any which way, this thing we wanted to he wanted to mainstream it. Okay. I
Uh,
didn't expect DC Comics to want the thing though. So what happened was I got it finally. I mean, well, David passed and I finished it kind of as best as I could. And then I made this dummies. And those dummies went all over the place. I had a whole like my big collectors at that time in the gallery in Uptown Gallery I was showing at were the Hearsts, who started comics, okay? And they said, oh, this is your work? Great. Well, we'll send it around to our different publishing arms. I got back this stack of rejection letters with like post-its all stuck on them. They're like, Bunky says we should look at this. I don't think we can. No, we can't publish this kind of book. This is just no, we can't do this. So I had this big pile of rejection letters, and I sent it to different comics. People were like, "Ooh, no, ooh," like. And then it was up at DC Comics, and I just had started working, doing a few things for Paradox. They had all those big books of whatever things, and it went around. The dummies were sitting on Lou Stathis's desk, the late Lou Stathis. I like Lou a lot. He was like, there is no way in hell DC Comics is going to publish this thing. But what happened was PPOW is David's gallery. They offered a show of the original art. And so we did put the show of the original art up, and their PPOW's like sister gallery is Exit Art. Exit Art is friends with Jeanette Kahn, who was publisher of DC Comics. So Exit Art people said, to Jeanette, oh, go down over to PPW and have a look at this comic book that's in there. You might be interested in it. She went in there and she's like, holy shit, this is great. And she went back to Vertigo and said, you do it. Do
Wow.
whatever
Huh.
they want. And that's it. That was the end of it.
Change anything, do it exactly as they say.
Well, they did, but so I maybe this is the moment to just screen share for a second. I don't know. Here, I'll show you this because no, hang on. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna hang on. I'm gonna go backwards. Okay, so here's the covers. Okay. Now here on the left is the DC Comics version. On the right is what it's supposed to be, slightly bigger, and it has these two discs. Well, DC, they went, oh, we don't like those discs. And they put them on the back cover
Hmm.
and made the figure slightly bigger or something. That was one of the two changes they made was to make me take the discs off the cover. And I don't really know why, because this is what the freaking inspiration for the cover was. A DC comic by Jack Kirby. I mean, excuse me, this New Gods cover with the two discs and a figure in the middle. And you could throw in the Steranko, Dali pastiche over there for the ground, maybe, right?
That's crazy that of all the things in the book, that's what they want. I mean,
Yeah, and that's what
I
they
guess
didn't like. They go, this doesn't look like a DC comic. It looks exactly like a DC comic.
well, I think you got off pretty lucky though, considering. I mean, of course it looks better the way it's intended, but I'm that's amazing that they otherwise stuck to their word. I'm actually since you bring up Jeanette Kahn, I I think she's such an underdiscussed figure in comics history, and I'm gratified to hear that she's behind greenlighting this because
He is behind this.
I've always
Anyway,
thought of
here's
her as
the
like
other thing.
a
Let me just
rare
keep
like. Oh, I'm sorry, James. Yes, go
let
ahead.
me keep going with this train of thought because talking about the cover, one of the things was I had done this work, and me and Marguerite did a bunch of work for the opening at PPOW. Basically, and I David loved 3D pictures, like these things you get on the roadside of Jesus winking or whatever. Or there's a million different kinds of these 3D winky images that you used to be able to find for cheap. It's very Americana type crap. So I was like, I want to do the cover in 3D. And we were talking to these people that was working for this animator, and there was these people I knew that did lenticular animations, and they had figured out a way we could do it onto a book cover. So I went to DC and I said, we designed this thing. And so what I'd done was I'd animated that figure in the middle. So he's on his he's tethered by his ankle to this kind of tree thing to the sidewalk. So in the movement in the Winky would be that the figure is kind of pulling and
Mm.
pulling its way up. So that was the idea. And then the two discs would be, three like a 180-degree turn for both of those heads. And then, the whole thing, and here's like another example where this is just a picture of it doesn't have the animation in the middle, but it gives it a sort of it gives it that 3D kind of depth. So we built it as a little set, and then that's photographed with this camera array. So in order to do it with the figure moving, it would be a certain amount of complication to put it together, but we could do it. But this is the first time I've even put these sketches together to see how they would have looked finished because they didn't want to do it. But guess what? The next month, they had a Superman comic with a 3D lenticular cover because they loved the idea. They just didn't want to do it for our book.
Yeah.
Like, wow, you buggers. That's just typical shit. Anyway, that's my screen share. But
Well, yeah, I still think though, I mean, considering the other content in the book, I mean, I am shocked that the rest of it was pretty much allowed. And was was the book supported in terms of forget interfering with the work itself? Once the book was out in the world, did DC
they
stand
advertised it
by it?
in Sandman, whatever. It was like I mean, I saw ads for it in the other DC comics like Sandman, and I'm assuming maybe they advertised it elsewhere, but I don't know. Comic advertising, you really don't know what they do. Any which
I
way,
never
you
see
did a
any and
25,000 print run and they sold it out, you know.
Yeah.
And 25,000 is pretty good freaking numbers for any book today. Forget it. Nobody's getting those kind of numbers. So
I encountered the book without just seeing it on the racks next to the other comics and the art. looked very intriguing to me. I knew nothing about it, and I picked it up, um, and was so impressed with it. Um, but I wonder if that's something that you thought David would have appreciated, people just picking instead of it being maybe in a bookstore that had a certain kind of that had transgressive literature in it, maybe like a quality bookstore or something, just it appearing on comic shelves just as one of the comics of the week. Do you think that that lack of context for it would have appealed to him? And I wonder how you guys thought about it.
Well, he said he wanted it to be something that kids would see that were going through things like him, so they'd know they weren't alone. You know, so he
Yeah.
wanted it to be seen by kids, and he wanted it to be mainstream as possible. And that's pretty much what you could do with a comic. I mean,
Yeah.
we're in comic shops, and it was a kind of a ghetto, or it weren't in bookstores yet. Not in 1980, 1996. You know,
I
when
wonder,
did
like if he wanted to speak to kids that might have been going through the same things he was going through. One of the things that I was a couple days ago, I was talking about doing this talk with you guys to one of the editors from the Simia textbook on David,
Mhm.
and he was interested to know what his feeling was that ideas about identity and the identity that David had and the way people define their identities during David's lifetime and now, 30 years later, has changed a lot. And I wonder what you guys might know about what David thought about defining himself with his identity, or if that was how he would think about maybe a shift in that today, or if you feel that that's changed, or if you have any perspective on how he felt about that, or maybe how your own feelings about that issue have changed since working on the book. It's such a different time now, but the book is so relevant to today as well.
Yeah,
I
but
think I think there was a sense, because of David from the beginning, David was an extraordinary person and had a tremendous amount of gravitas. I mean, I'm saying that he was also really funny and stupid and giggly, and we had a lot of fun with him. But he also had this sense of importance. And the moment in the East Village where we were all working together, we also had a kind of an idea that we were doing something special. So amongst people who thought they were doing something special, David was a standout as really a leader of people who were doing something special. When the AIDS crisis happened, we went, originally we went through um, just general politics being for shit. We hated Reagan and all of the things that were going on, homelessness and everything else that was happening, and the rundown state of New York, right? It was the backdrop for all of that. But when David literally rose to the occasion, so against censorship, against the HIV ghettoization that happened, and just the fight for Medicaid, for all of it. And he really, rose to the challenge. And so, as we were working on that, I was fully aware that, there was going to be some legacy with this work. That couldn't just be an average, wasn't just a throwaway project, it
Right.
wasn't like give me something, do this over the weekend and I'll just knock it out, it
yeah, there's no knocking that shit out.
was no knocking it out, there was no knocking it out.
It's a bit fraught.
And every single, the thing is, the color is done very much from page to page, from sequence to sequence, excuse me, through moods. But then there's also like all these little comic references all the way through it as well. So when there's a girl standing out in front of the hotel and she's purple, and all of the colors are taken from another. I think I took them from Steranko, but instead of putting them in this order that Steranko would put them in the purple in the background and the flesh color and all of that, I just moved them all around to make that reference to
You
page.
upended
So I
Tim.
upended it. I sort of, yeah, did a little bit of subterfuge using the regular comic book colors and that. So it's like all little things going on all the way through it.
It's really easy in comics, it's almost impossible to do anything progressive because you just run into this incomprehension. I mean, just even for instance, like our lovely friend that did the semiotext book about David, we did a 10-page story about David for the semiotext about David, and we couldn't get anybody to look at it. So they took one page of
Compare
it.
didn't want to look at it, but I mean that's
Yeah, well, they didn't look at it, and so
just to go back to the actual
it
drawing.
remains unpublished. Can I finish? Yeah,
Yes.
it's just one of those things because they didn't understand what they were seeing. Uh, People don't really see comics as a vehicle for serious work. So in a book full of interviews and essays and all these other things that are prose, because prose oriented writers and prose oriented critics don't really see art as a communication medium. They analyze it in textual terms, but it's really hard for them to put visual things into words. And so, I mean, I've seen like things are changing now. Like, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, Zadie Smith edited an anthology of prose stories and included some short pieces by Daniel Clowes and Chris Ware, and they're brilliant. And so the perception has changed, and now you can do much more sophisticated things in comics, and they're taken seriously. But in 1996, there really was almost nothing of that kind of attention to comics. So we weren't quite there yet.
I mean,
And
just
and
to
so
talk
which is
about
why we
today,
had such a hard time getting something like this published because it doesn't fit into any of the niches that comics traditionally fill, like
I was going to talk about the way you handle the drawing as well. Let's just talk about that. I'm sorry, I'm taking your job, Austin. I'm
No, no,
directing
no, that's okay, please.
hmm.
that. One of the things that James does, which is so interesting, is there are all these different angle panels. There are things that we had seen in normal. Again, he takes some things that you've seen in traditional comics, mainstream comics, and he manipulates them in such a way as to make them to render them even more psychedelic or more disturbing, and plays with putting things on the page and um, taking figures out of the panel and putting them into a different space. So I mean, he's really going back into the lineage of comics, all the way back where the little ink pots on the page and ink getting spilt on the page. There's all of that reference going on. So I mean, the thing is loaded with the history of comics. What do you say, James, to that?
Well, I mean, I'm only putting in what fits. So yeah, you got your little bits of Kirby and Neil Adams stuck in the middle of other things. I mean, I'd rather pull references from other things than comics, and there's a lot more things from realism or these kind of grim noir. That long, but even David's face, the long, lanky head, and all these kinds of things. It's just something that it's so kind of seamy, so New York and grimy, like Taxi Driver or Midnight Cowboy grimy,
Well,
of
you
New
were
York.
just commenting on, I posted an image from the book on Instagram, and you were saying that David might have taken the monologue might have been inspired from Dog Day Afternoon.
Oh yeah, yeah, no, it is because
Yeah.
it's transsexual talking about how her boyfriend robbed a place to get the money to pay for a transition. That's the story of Dog Day Afternoon.
Yeah. So
And
I
so,
want
and also David, like there's a bit at the end that everybody loves so much, and it's David's penultimate speech, and he goes, "All these moments will be lost like tears in the rain." Well, that's a direct quote from Blade Runner, okay? And Rutger Hauer made that shit up. It wasn't in Philip K. Dick's book, and it wasn't in Ridley Scott's script. That was purely fucking Rutger Hauer, you know, playing with a pigeon and being poetic. So and then David took that and just stuck it in there. It's totally appropriated, and that's he's got that sensibility. Like the most original thought is in there that is actually his thought, and that the right down slapped exactly right next to a deliberately quoted pop culture quote. So it's
the idea of this comic not making it into that semiotext retrospective work about him, that seems to be against how David looked at art. To him, a comic, it doesn't, it seems like from what you're describing that a distinction between a contemporary movie, a comic book, fine art, for him, it seems like the picture you're painting of him, it seems like there's very little of that hierarchy in how he perceived these things.
Well, we did like look at, and Marguerite will agree with this, I'm sure. Like in our East Village cohort, we all were in bands. We also wrote. We also did this or that or performances. Like Marguerite's been in bands. She does sculptures. She paints. She sings. I mean, like we, makes movies. I
Poet,
mean, so
darling.
everything is kind of on the same level of intensity. You're going at everything the same way. And David was very much like that. And we also were very collaborative. So we're coming from a place of not really wanting a hierarchy of mediums, like good work is good work. Who the fuck cares in what form it comes in? It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, we have to crack those kind of distinctions. Of course, now I tend to think sometimes comics. There's my friend Rick Parker right there. He's got a beautiful hardcover book, and I'm like, I could have liked to see maybe that book because it's about the U.S. Army being on newsprint and in a $5 form, so more people would actually pick it up. But there isn't really a distribution mechanism to make things like that. So comics have switched now to the point where they're no longer in a cheap disposable form, and they're now ensconced in this very, like formal form of like a hardcover book, which then becomes like a whole nother thing, price point, everything about it like just changes. It's no longer quite the. You remember we used to go to the bookstore and you'd go out, you'd buy the paperback, you'd never buy the fucking hardcover. Who buys hardcovers? You'd wait for it to come out in paperback. Now it's like, well, no, people don't even do that. They just have the digital book, and I can't really read that way, but whatever. We've gone the entire other way to make these elite kind of boutique items are the comics, and they've done like a hardcover gleaming book of Bazooka Joe comics.
Right.
Do those really deserve to be preserved for eternity like that? I don't know. I kind of not. I'm not convinced. You know what I mean?
Well, in this edition that you guys have published, the book is in paperback form, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about you've mentioned the problems that Digital Chameleon, who were employed
Oh, yeah.
by DC to. I used to see their name in comic book credits all the time when I was younger and not really understand what they were doing, but I guess they were figuring out color separations for digital. So, and what you guys have been saying is that they mistranslated the color,
Oh,
and
no,
so
no,
part
wait,
of
wait,
the
wait, wait, back up because
yeah, yeah,
really,
yeah.
Digital Chameleon are lovely. And I remember it was Laverne Kinzierski, and there's an artist named Igor Kordej, wonderful, wonderful artist. They were all working on that stuff. They did their best. There
Okay.
was another color separationist that did the cover and the disc pages that are the chapter breaks. This is the first colorist engaged. When they saw the rest of the book, they refused to do it. I don't remember who the fuck the name is of the person. It was like a company, one of the companies that they usually
Okay.
use. Okay. They did the cover and the disc. They refused to do the rest of it based on the content.
Oh,
Then Digital Chameleon got involved. They had no problem with the content, and they do a wonderful job on like P. Craig Russell's books and things like that. So they're highly professional.
But it
However,
was
they
those
did have a
unknown
weird thing that they kept
colors.
reading the colors slightly wrong. Marguerite's oranges were coming out pink. And we were kind of like, so we had to keep sending them back, going, no, could you really look at that? They couldn't quite believe that we wanted the colors that bright, you know?
Yeah, what kept
Surely you
happening.
want that pulled down. Like, no, we want it that bright, you know?
I kept telling them push the color. So they would keep, lowering the register on the color, pulling it back to make it a little more palatable. And I
Yeah.
would keep writing back going, no, saturate the color more, saturate it.
You know how
And
the Vertigo books looked in those days? They were like kind of toned down. It was a
yes.
lot of
yeah.
Matt Hollingsworth, the kind of very tasteful, dark coloring that all those, Neil Gaiman books had and all that kind of stuff. So telling them we wanted this fucking thing to hurt your eyes when you turn the page, they were just like, "What? How could you want that?" Like, well, no, that's what we want. So
And then trying to clean it up. But that was the other hilarious thing to me. They would like try and put it back in the lines. And I would go,
yeah,
no, no,
exactly.
no, no, no. It's meant to be outside the lines.
Yeah.
Oh, clean it up. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Just let it be.
Go back and
Let
sloppy it up again.
It's the whole narrative, the subtext of this book is blood, right? So, I mean, just to me, it has to bleed. I mean, so the book had to bleed, you
Do
know.
you think do you think that maybe their just basic desire to push back against that is that they don't want people to be reminded that this is made by hand. They want the color to just they want the reader to just forget that they're reading something that someone actually colored. They just want it to be almost like a pure presentation of information. So that's like a cardinal, just to be alerted that this is a work of art being made is like the last thing you should do.
Yeah, well, they just do these things like they would color, you'd have a regular book and they would color in the panel borders with a dark color. And I'm like, and then
Yeah.
all the panels to me would run together visually. I can't, I no longer could distinguish the panels one from the other. It just starts to look like a much of brown
Yeah,
mush to me.
I mean, I think you're right about it. So it's just an area of control, keeping
Yeah.
everything standard. Everything
Yeah.
has to stay inside the lines. This is
It's
the
like,
way the story
making Vince
unfolds.
Coletta, redo all the Kirby heads or whatever.
Once you're no longer reading the comic exactly the way you've been trained to read, it's disruptive, right? So as soon as things aren't quite contained in the borders, it's disruptive. You're staying in a place that you shouldn't be staying, right? Your eyes hanging on a little bit longer somewhere where you're not supposed to be. You're in the shadows a little bit too long. I mean the panel you were talking about where the woman has the terrible injury. That is the way I colored that, she's like pinks and reds. It's a lot of that's awful. It's
Yeah.
just bloody awful. And that's the piece I have, that I was trying to get everybody to look at. That wound, right? I mean, everything else is fairly much comes down. So there's a
Right.
lot of attention to like, I want you to look at this. So a lot of times in the book, we're pointing out, this is what we want you to see. This
Right.
is an uncomfortable place that we want you to go, you know.
Well,
Well,
so
I'm
when we finally got to, like after selling 25,000 copies, Jeanette's gone. Paul Levitz is running it, and he doesn't really want to bring it back into print. It's an uncomfortable thing. It's the comic you can't even hide under your bed. What if your dad finds that one? He's going to be like, oh my God. So, they're 10, 15, 20 years goes by. Calvin Reed's running a brief comics imprint. He got Publishers Weekly to start a comics imprint, but it only ran for a book. We did all the reconstruction work on the original watercolors for that. So we got rid of the digital separations, went back to the watercolors, rescanned them, like worked on cleaning them up a bit and making them printable, and then Calvin's thing got canceled before it even went. It was solicited, but then it was canceled. So then it was like, finally, I think I sent a PDF of it to Fantagraphics. They'd never seen it.
Oh wow.
Gary, Gary Groth and Eric and they hadn't actually seen it. How the fuck did they not see this? You know what I mean? So it was kind of shocking to me. But then they saw it. They're like, oh, great, let's print it. Okay, great. Can you keep it in print? That'd be nice. They sold out the ones they did. They didn't go back to print. I said, Gary, there's a big one-man show of David at the Whitney a couple of years ago. I said, Gary, you got some copies left? Because they'll want some at the museum. He goes, oh, I'll bet a bunch of museum goers are going to want a comic. It's like, yeah, they will. I was like, okay, well, give me the rights back. And we got the rights back and we published it in paperback. And it was the best-selling book in the whole fucking show at the museum, you know? It was
Yeah.
their bestseller in the bookstore there. It's just like, wow, like, so, because the problem is just people don't really see outside the niche market that comics is supposed to appeal to.
I mean, there is another aspect to this, which is that it's a labor of love at this point, because, we've been sitting with this comic, we've been talking about this comic for a lot of years. It's not the most comfortable place for us to go all the time to revisit some very difficult memories. And but we're there with David. I still have the David that we worked on the book with. I don't have the legacy version of him. I
Right.
still have that version. So this for us is always just, having that conversation with David. We got to keep your book out into the world. And then the duality of it is that at this point, he's David, he's become an icon, And so there's another level, which to be honest, I always felt he was an icon, even while he was while he was with
When
us until
he was already an icon when he was alive. So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, so it's kind of a labor of love to keep this thing going as we do, and
Well, we have it in it's $20. It's paperback for $20. That's pretty accessible. We sell them by mail. That's
yeah,
fine.
just
We do have material to do a really nice boutique version with the 3D cover with the extra 10-page story that me and Marguerite did. It's more of a ground zero. It's a little bit of a funnier style, but it's a nice story and it works really well. And we could include that. And I also have we have a piece that's like a sort of a essay piece. We'll probably work on it a lot more, but it's about what we different things that we did with David, the shows and things like that, and our experiences with them personally. And so that could be, then it's a 100-page book. You know what I mean? It's like it just changes and it has the cool funky 3D lenticular
one
cover.
thing
Like,
to
I just
say
like to
about
see it once done.
one of the things to say though, James's inks were spectacular, right? So it's nice that we have the obviously I didn't color the originals of the black and white, obviously. So we have
I
two
don't want to see a
sets.
black and white edition. No, I don't want to do one of
Oh,
those.
I'm saying that your originals were spectacular, however.
Yeah,
You
well,
know,
that's fine.
it's
You can
kind of
still
a,
show
but
the
it's so
original.
interesting because they're a slightly different narrative at the end of it all. So when
Yeah.
you read black and white, you sort of, emotionally, it's a little bit of a different
It
story.
always was meant to be in color, so the final product is the color. I can't really justify it a black and white edition.
Well, I wanted to
I'm
follow up.
leaving you out, and that's important. And
I wanted to follow up with something Marguerite was saying about the color, just about comics in general. I was so intrigued by two things you said. First, this idea that serializing stories and making it hard for the reader, making the reader have to do some work. And then the idea of having to linger on the art in the book, using color to instead of process things quickly, to force to obstruct that a bit. And I think that is something that to their detriment, comics really avoid. I think they often define themselves as something that's just a pure communication of information. And I think part of why I'm so drawn to this book is its ability to subvert that, but also presents itself as a traditional comic in a lot of ways. But I think that idea of obstructing the reader's process of reading a comic is something that's so under discussed in how to approach comics. I'm wondering if there are other, if that's something that you feel comics lack that you see, or if there are peers of yours, specifically Marguerite, that you think that you see working in that same way that you're interested in.
Hmm. You know, I suppose in later years we've seen people do all sorts of things, right? We've seen a lot more, you know, a lot more. I don't know the answer. I'm
I
just
mean,
an
I got
old.
to say, I kind of steer students away from that kind of thinking. Like, basically, you should be able to read a comic through, and if you're stopped, that's kind of a problem because you're losing the communication thing a little bit. And I don't think anything that Marguerite did in the color stops you when you're reading the book. You just keep going, but you might linger a little more. I don't really know. It's not like that Alex Ross thing where you go, "Oh, look, every panel looks like Norman Rockwell." I gotta,
To me,
like
it's like Lionel
Definitely,
that shit is like
Feininger's.
getting hit by a pie like every
definitely
2 seconds.
storytelling. I mean, I love Starank. I love Bill Sienkiewicz just for like all the color and stuff. And he was doing Electra Assassin right around that
Yeah,
time.
Yeah.
That came right after I was finishing that. He was doing Electra Assassin, and we used to laugh because it was like my had long black hair at that point.
it
We called
looked
it
a lot like Marguerite. Yeah.
Tales of Marguerite, and then there was I was doing all these baby paintings, and he had a cover with the lecture with the babies, and I was like, for
Oh
fuck's
shit!
sake, in
Look
our
at
house,
he's in our underwear drawer. What's going on?
in our house, what's going on? But I like that, his use of color was kind of like coming right on that.
Well, he's like that was a lot of stops. You were looking at Electra Assassin. That was a really innovative thing. But there was a lot of places you go like, "Holy shit, look at this!" You could see the staples, like,
Yeah.
and you get a little hung up. But then you had Frank Miller doing things like uh
Ronin was great.
Jeff
Ronin,
Darrow, those things hard boiled, and then that's way too much. You got like way too much going. But I guess it's not really meant to be read. It's like a bunch of set. images to be looked at in sequence, but it's okay that you get stopped because he wants you to stop. It's like the Mobius effect, like, ooh, look at all a million little figures. We weren't really doing that. I wanted it to be read and
Well,
you
I was.
do. Of course, you hit the wall of text because I had to keep David's, rants intact. That's really a no-no. You're not supposed to do a whole page of just, you know, text. And I don't know if I'm not sure if it works or not, but I didn't really see any other way to possibly do it.
I didn't mean to
I
say that you
wasn't being
stopped.
literal. I was obliquely kind of,
But focused.
yeah.
You
Yeah, that
focus on it.
you linger on the work in a way that I think sometimes comics are very uncomfortable with. I think sometimes comics are uncomfortable with allowing people to come away from a drawing with their own, to not be just whipped through the drawing, to spend time
Yeah.
with it and come away with your own, instead of being directed to a specific feeling. I think this work really opens you up, as it should, for because the subject matter is so much deeper than most comics, and the way that it's presented graphically allows you it allows the work in a way that I think a it has a traditional approach, but a much more orthodox traditional approach wouldn't allow that, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah.
Well, one of the things that I sort of thought about, or I still think about with color. We have associative color, right? So red is anger, red is drama, red is blood, that kind of adding language to a color, which we do, what a lot of people just automatically, especially when they used to come in
Some
the
people
gallery.
think it's sexy, lady in red.
Yeah, so there's all of this kind of, yeah, associative language that goes on with color. But
Yeah,
then there's also just the idea of color being of itself in itself for that moment, right? And operating in a slightly different way, um, which is more imminent. Let's say it's more imminent of itself. And that's really interesting when you start to try and play with those things and think about disrupt. And again, I'm using the word disrupting those traditional patterns of how we think about color behaving, and how we're supplying language to color as we see it, and then just experiencing color viscerally and on another level. So I kind of yeah, I'm always thinking about those kind of ideas, that sort of um and James had written a really, and see, I was thinking about the black and white James, but James had written a really interesting article about the way that color flattens the page, right? It flattens your entrance into the page.
Oh, it's because linear drawings, they kind of hang in, sort of imaginary three-dimensional space. So you can kind of almost like reach into a page if it's just line drawings. But once you put the color on, it turns it into surface. So it turns an enclosed area into a shape. So now you have flat shapes as opposed to an open kind of wire structure, which is the ink drawing. It's just a weird thing, and it was based on this guy who was a jet in investigating jet pilots and how they perceive space when they're flying at supersonic speeds. Like they have to anticipate what's around the corner that's unseen. Like, and so it was like a whole. They called line drawings impoverished drawings.
Mm,
And I was like, wow, that's fucking shit. Like we just got devalued.
yeah.
All you do is draw. You're
I
you're
mean,
impoverished. I was like, what the fuck? Their whole terminology was so
what's
just.
interesting to me, so having said that, was that when I'm using different colors, right? As soon as you add white into something, it it changes its relationship. I would use like a lot of bright, clear yellows that are just literally suspended, to me, suspended particles in space that still retain the space, right? So you can still go into that space. As soon as you put a white into the red or the pink or whatever, it blocks off the space. It stops the access. So, when we're reading these things, it's really exciting. You can be like in and out of the spaces depending on what quality of color you're using.
Oh,
Uh,
that reminds me of the other thing that happened to me when I was doing post York is I had worked for DC and doing this other book. And you could see in 7 Miles a Second, I did a bunch of times. If I did this kind of tilted panels, that you'd have these areas where I left the white of the paper. to be a shape on the page, you know? Well, I mean, because they did the book the way I wanted and they didn't interfere with anything, that was fine. But when I was working on a book under contract to DC, my editor said, "Oh, you can't leave white space in the page. You have to use the real estate."
Mm.
And I was like, "What?" You know? And it's like, "Holy shit!" And so they were kind of making me draw everything to the edge of the board. And they like to run things into the gutters and everything else. So it's like really a nightmare for me. So then finally, when I got to do post work for Tom at Uncivilized, I was like, "Oh, you're not worried about the real estate, right?" He's like, "Yeah, go ahead. Just have all the white space you want." It's like, this is great, Like, it's so weird that they look at it. But of course, that, remember, like DC Comics used to sell like third pages for ads and things.
Yeah.
So they're totally valuing every single inch, Like,
Well, with all the discussion about the color, if people want to see the remastered colors, I've just put a link in the chat for people to go to Ground Zero Books, which you and Marguerite are doing together. I would assume you've like
yeah.
this edition you guys have published. So if you guys click this link, if you're watching this on YouTube later, you can just go to groundzerobooks.com to get the edition of the book that has the color on display just as it should be
Yeah,
in the
it's the
way that we're
proper
doing.
version. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
I have one more question. There is already a question in the chat, so we'll get to that after my final question. I encourage everyone else, if you have questions for James and Marguerite, to ask them now. But I just want to loop around to something you said at the beginning, when I was asking you about that first panel, and you were saying, James, to you the book is about empathy, and I think as I'm reading it that I get so much anger in the book. I mean, it's to me it's an extremely, and I think it's appropriate, um, that there is this anger. It's the anger is like searing off the page. And when you said empathy, I kind of thought, well, maybe it's maybe the book is about anger at lack of empathy. Would that be a
Yeah.
fair way to talk about it?
Yeah. Pretty much. That's it. I don't know. I mean, we're in a world right now where half the country doesn't seem to have any goddamn empathy. So there we go. Like,
with anger.
we're
But
we're in a
well,
bunch.
David was angry. I mean, he was angry. We were all angry. We were
So
angry about
angry.
we were angry
Angry.
kids. You know, but uh, but the desire for a better world was there. Obviously, that was the desire that this child who grew into a teen who then you know had this terrible life and succeeded in some respects, in many respects. And he died, but the success was in his art, right? Was was a very affectionate thing, that he wanted people to feel hope. The book was supposed to be hopeful, bizarrely.
Yeah.
So yeah, so but anger
A
and
little
hope.
more nihilistic than I would have liked. I mean, that spread with the train that really goes to someplace very dark. That I sometimes wonder if that was a thing to put out into the world, But it's David's thoughts, and it seemed important, and I couldn't edit it out.
Well, I
You
mean,
end
we
up
took.
with I don't know what the message that people take away from it is. It really, the thing I can hang on to is the empathy, but
Well, that's one of
Well,
my.
James,
Oh,
oh,
yes.
sorry, I was going to say James is a pretty dark character. You might be, grasping from this conversation. So it's kind of important to remember he and David worked together. Two angry young men working together. It wasn't the two of them would get together and big orators, the both of them, and whip themselves up with a lot to say
Yeah.
and a lot of action. Both of them were out being activists. It wasn't like James was just sitting on his hands through all of this. He was,
well, he was mad at me because we were, me and Marguerite were more focused on the homeless issue at that moment because it was just really super apparent in our neighborhood. It was just like this ongoing thing, and it was right in our faces. And maybe we weren't so much of activists on AIDS as he would have liked at that moment. And he was kind of feeling like we were on different issues, and I even now when I go back I'm in the studio right now and I keep going back and drawing street people from New York, and it just seems to be something that comes back in my work, but it's something that I feel strongly about, and I didn't know. I didn't anticipate, what was going to happen with David and how fast he was going to go or any of that. It just was, I wished I'd finished it so he could have seen it, the whole thing. He only got to see the first, 3/5 of it. So yeah,
One
that's,
thing I should also make clear with talking about if it's in some ways about empathy or anger at a lack of empathy is that I think one thing that distinguishes it from political works and comics that might come out now is this real lack of an epiphany at the end or lack of a guide for how you're supposed to. So I'm grasping at maybe ways that of things that pop up, but its overall message, and I think this is what makes it so sophisticated, is not there's not one message to take away from it because the events depicted here, how could there, how could there be? I think that they're unanswerable things that it brings up. And I do think I wonder if that's one of the things that I'm fascinated that DC didn't have any notes on it on something like that because I could imagine a work coming out now that approaches some of these things, but to leave the reader to linger on it and make up their own mind in the way that this book does about how they're supposed to react to it. I think it was even more unique now
yeah.
for comics to approach that.
Yeah, DC would never have initiated something like this. It's not in their DNA,
Yeah.
It wasn't even Fantagraphics wasn't doing anything like that at the time. I mean, I didn't go near them because that wasn't what they were doing. I mean, they
Yeah.
had Union and
Austin, I think you're 100% right with what you're saying because I had mentioned it, I had alluded to Roland Barthes before, and we were reading Foucault, and the idea that um, a mess trying to decipher messages, right? How do we recreate messages? So the idea of like pulling everything apart and revealing everything,
Right.
and then what do we put back in its place? And so we were very ambivalent. David and I would sit and talk about this quite a lot. We were very ambivalent about, having exposed, everything that was going on in terms of media and language and visuals, um, semiotics, right? The semiotics of it all. Then how do you put back together and what do you put in its place? You know, because there was a certain moment where we weren't nihilistic. So that's why this is a narrative, right? This is why this is a narrative book. This isn't just a completely random set of marks. Um, so there's a narrative in the book. But I mean, how do you take responsibility? So I guess this is like the idea of taking responsibility for what you say. How do you influence other people? What right do you have to influence other people beyond laying out what's going on in the narrative, right? I mean, I think that was a lot of the thinking. Does that make sense? I hope that
Yes,
made
yes.
some
No,
sense.
that's a beautiful response. I'm going to actually move on to one of the, and I encourage other people now to ask questions. And again, you can have me read the question, or I can put you on screen. But Ed Ilya asks, when you were talking about the comic that didn't get published in the Semiotext book, why has that short never appeared together with the main body of 7 Miles So Far? I do hope that one day it will be.
Yes, Ed Ilya published that in England in his big, massive, mammoth book of best new manga. That's the only place that Semiotext, the piece we did for Semiotext, has appeared, and it was a digest-sized book. But yeah, I would like to put that into an edition of it. The problem is the reason why we didn't do that already is just because it's a ground zero strip. So it's us and David are the main characters in the thing, but we're drawn more I mean, I can share you. Here, I'll find you a couple panels from it.
Mm. Oh,
Hang
yeah.
on.
Well, that's
Yeah,
from Miles.
there's a spread from that strip. It's a ground zero spread, so it's a bit more
Mm.
cartoony style. Like this spread is based on. Well, this is Marguerite's story, so maybe she should describe it.
So I had basically I told David to read Huysmans Against Nature à Rebours. And in the book Against Nature, there is a passage, there's a chapter where he's celebrating the death of his virility and he has a black funeral for himself. And David loved it. I mean, it was like everything's black in the Wiesman's book. Everything's black. The food is black. The floor is black. The table's black. Just everything's black. And of course, that really, so there's me telling David about this story, but we're actually in the back of a cafe as it's happening.
Yeah,
So,
I'm eating. I'm in the middle there eating at the coffin, and I have a cloud over my head, raining on my head, like that character in Peanuts or something. Like here, it's basically a conversation Marguerite had with David at Yaffa Cafe. So here's Marguerite and David in there. It's a deconstructive page of a discussion they had talking about boundaries and very much in the Foucault mode and all that.
Oh, those pages are beautiful.
Yeah. So it's a 10-page piece that's really not published in America. Ed published it in England, and that's the only place it's been seen. It's just a bit more of a cartoon. It's a bit of a different style. So do you put that before, like if it's in a book, do you put that before the main story? Do you put it after the main story? Do you break it up with the essay? I don't know. It doesn't really fit 100% with 7 miles a second per se because it's such a heavy piece of work. So this is just a bit of different, has a different feel to it, you know?
Yeah.
And it's Marguerite's voice as opposed to David's, you know? So,
I mean, I'm looking at this. It's really funny. I'm looking at it, and me and David talking about boundaries and borders, and we're lifting up the panels and all of that. And of course, it's exactly this is exactly what I do. I'm obviously obsessed with like getting rid of borders and boundaries.
there's me with the cloud raining on my head.
And at this point in my life, I have a horror of the word border and boundary. I mean, I don't want to read another essay with that in it ever again. I'm going to kill myself.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, here's like this pattern is like it's the map, but it's also the tablecloths at Yaffa Cafe. So it's kind of like everything's embedded with references, and you go, "What the hell? What are we doing?" Anyway, that was something interesting. So yeah, I'd like to see that. I'd love to see that published here. You know, yeah, it's the boutique edition. We should even call it that, the boutique edition.
Yeah, that would be. Well, Ed also asks, I originally read the rants from David as speaking from the delirium of illness and perhaps the drug treatments for that. But it sounds from what you are saying that the work actually precedes that time in his life, his end of life. So it isn't the rage against dying, and knowing he died from AIDS perhaps led me to that wrong assumption. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
A lot of what
yeah.
he would get up and I mean that was part of who he was early on. I mean he was fed up with general politics, I mean just look at the landscape we were living in the East Village was just destroyed, you know. Um
he was writing those raves from early on, but it really was when the problem was there was a hard time with the diagnoses in like we're talking 87, 88. We were in Belgium in 1988. We got letters from him. The first letter said, I'm not sure. I didn't get I got a positive, then I got a negative, and Peter was dying. And then we got another letter like a month later, and he's like, I got a positive. I've got HIV. And then he's like, at demonstration, he circled a photograph from the front of the paper, and he circled his head, me, like, and and at that point, then he was just dealing with that, and look, it gave his work a lot of focus. Like David's paintings have he's one of the only artists I could really use the word symbology for, because he had a symbology. He had a set of symbols that he used, and they stood for political things, and they stood for this kind of worldview. He had a kind of a distanced worldview of the planet, and when he got sick, that all came sharply into focus. So he was really able to like absolutely focus every bit of his energy and use all his repertoire of symbols to great effect. And so he had all the the ammunition he needed, and he just put it all together and threw it out there. And then his work took on so much power at that point. But
yeah. Yeah.
that was
Because
the point
also
where we were really able to work together, because he was just having to keep his head down and do his work. And a lot of times he wouldn't answer the phone. He wouldn't,
It was also, I mean, at that point, it was really hard to be gay in I mean, to be gay anywhere, you know. It was dangerous to be queer, it was dangerous.
yeah.
So, a lot of the work was amphibians. He's between two worlds, so he would come. You, David appeared very straight for the most part. He, wasn't like at all effeminate.
Oh yeah, he didn't
But he
have.
was definitely, I mean, obviously he was, yeah, but
I
he was
didn't
very
realize he
gay.
was gay when
And
I.
so yeah, so then he had this like, he was dealing with that. I mean, like just as everybody was at the time. People were getting beaten up, wasn't like it is now. I mean, I hate to say it,
Well, it's getting bad again. Fucking hell.
the AIDS epidemic made it a lot easier for people to be out. People were forced out through the AIDS epidemic, and and that was to some extent forced into normalization of all of that. But David was scapegoated for a lot of that. So it was really tough on him.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I was trying to ask about earlier with this, the difference in what he might have thought of being defined by an identity or not wanting to be defined by an identity versus how identity is talked about now. If that makes any sense. I mean, it was such a different moment that this work comes out of and what David's larger project was about. Um, but it also, I think the work transcends the identity that it's about. Whereas I think there is a tendency sometimes with political work that addresses some of the same themes now to to focus maybe more on identity than David does. But maybe I'm
No,
completely
because we were all coming from a much different kind of space. It's like, rock and roll, whatever, punk and bisexual. We're just kind of like, everybody was kind of bisexual, whether or not they were practiced or not. You kind of like, oh, I'm open to whatever, like you go, oh, that's cool, good, that's cool, that'd be cool, whatever. You might never act on it or anything, but then they decided like, oh no, either you're gay or you're straight, like, okay, oh, so you're not allowed to be bisexual, so no, it's no longer okay anymore. And so, like they just locked everything fucking down, unfortunately. And now we're in another state, and everybody got all fucking upset about, oh no, it's too woke, blah blah blah, and these idiots just want to stay stupid, or stay asleep. Go back to sleep, asshole. It's like, I don't know. In the thing, like, meanwhile, we do have to live, and I don't like that everybody decided, oh, it has to be this or it has to be that or
Well,
anything.
I'm going to be writing an essay about David's work with Rambo shortly. They're doing a museum show at no, where is it? It's at the Leslie Lohman Gallery. And Sergio Besso that was at the Queen's Museum is doing a show of David's photographs with Rambo masks. So I've been reading about Rambo and Verlaine, of course, and the
Like my
David and
favorite thing it is. Shit.
yeah. So David was in this epic relationship at the time himself. But I think David saw himself as a greater, in a sense, I think he identified with the poet, like this greater figure of a literary figure that's an artistic figure that transcends all of that
yeah.
time. So I think that was the original concept was, to have this greater literary status. And I say literary, I mean in the sense of, a Rambo-like
Yeah, well, he did
legend.
everything. So, I mean,
Yeah.
but the visual art wasn't his total most preeminent incarnation. He valued all the things kind of equally, I think, and could have gone any direction, depending on what was
I
going
mean,
on.
what in terms of identity, which is just a funny aside, really. Um, Peter Hujar had said to him, fabricate your identity a little bit, embellish a little bit. So we were all encouraged to
Well, yeah,
spruce up our bios
Peter
a
would
little.
say, "I was born on Tibetan on a mountainside, raised by Tibetan monks." Like
Yeah.
in one interview, and the next one he'd be like, "My dad was a truck driver, and my mom was a prostitute." Like
Yeah.
you just make the shit up every time new. And David started doing that too, because at one point they did the Normal catalog of David's Big Show and Normal, And there's his timeline, and it says like, when I was 12 years old, I was a Black Panther, and I wore one black glove to school. I was ejected from school for wearing the black glove, but I raised my fist on the way out. It's like, David, like, what the fuck? Are you serious? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very different, yeah. I think that's what I'm getting at. That's a different way of discussing yourself, Then
yeah,
I'm not saying people don't do that now, but I think
people
for who
do.
he was.
We have a politician here on Long Island that got evicted for making shit up. About that.
His
Stuff
mother,
happens
David's
all the
mother
time.
had, there was a letter at Feld's library that they had on display, and it was David's mother who, I think I don't know, it was an English teacher maybe, but she was advising David on, creating a literary persona for himself, so a writer persona, and how his writing should have a certain voice, and but let me tell you, David works on his writing like he would write it 20 times. I mean,
Mm.
David rewrite and rewrite and rewrite some of those passages. He pulled them apart, reused them.
Yeah, yeah. In that
He
same
was
show,
not
he
like
had
a.
comics that he'd drawn. I hadn't seen them before, but they were like sort of Robert Crumb style, starring a kid named Dave with a long face. But why the long face, Dave? Like, I'm smoking too much pot. Sort of based on the Freak Brothers and drawn in Robert Crumb style. So I hadn't seen those before, but I was like, oh boy. Like, well, he's
Got
right. He
some
did need
teenage
to be taught
memorabilia.
something, but
You know.
his
I
art
mean,
got a lot better towards the end. He had a steep learning curve. His early stuff, Marguerite went to his first show and came back and went, stuff's pathetic. It's just barely hanging together. It's flapping in the breeze. Like he used paper mache head.
Paper Mache was terrible. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it was so
By the
bad.
end, he really had gotten some good painting chops, and it took him a while. But it's like we all were learning what we're doing, so we're all
I'm
stealing from each other.
looking at him because when we went on these, we did these big painting jams together, and he was like, I'm just talking about the
I
white.
showed you.
I am hung up on this, the white and the black and the gray. And like once he started mixing all of that, um, everything would go mushy gray. And I was like, David, you've got to keep your colors clean.
Hey, there you go. There's one of the painting jams. That's David's big hideous head.
Yeah.
One of the painting jams. It's freaking awful. That's a painting we sold of his. That
Mm.
was there's the oh my God. Here's the installation he did for us with the dead bodies. Lovely. Imagine sitting with that for a month.
Yeah,
That's real fun. I don't know. Yeah, there's David with his own corpse. He played
wow.
his father, and his father dies in the movie, and he played him. So he's standing looking at his own corpse, which is also his father's corpse. Chew on that one. It's like, what the hell? Just too weird. Anyway, got all this stuff. This is shows David did at our gallery.
Mm.
Strange stuff.
There's two
There's
questions.
David at my opening. Look at Marguerite with Cheryl, and there's David off to the side.
Mm.
You know, don't have many pictures. Here's one picture he took of me on Times Square. Hot male. Jesus Christ. I even got that sneer on my face. Like, wow.
Yeah.
All right, that's enough. That's
No,
the
no, those are
that's
incredible
the
to see.
scroll. That's the scroll. One of the scrolls of stuff. I taped it together, and then he wrote stuff like this: staircases, the armchairs of the poor. It's like that's a Davidism.
Uh,
Yeah, no, it's just too funny, really. Yeah.
there's
Third section will be more heavily written. He knew that was coming. Anyway, that's it. I'm gonna
No, those
stop.
are beautiful to see. There's two questions in the chat, and then we probably have time for maybe one more. So if you have another question you'd like to ask, ask it as we're doing these last two questions. Alex Dubin would like to know, is there any chance we'll ever see a collection of the Ground Zero strips, even if collecting them in one place goes against the original intent?
No, it
Thank
doesn't. It's
Alex.
fine. There'll be a book someday.
We keep trying to think. We keep trying to do it. The thing is, they're all weird shapes as well. It wasn't.
No, it would have to be a sort of like Raw magazine or something where it's like a oversized kind of tabloid thing, and then it has other little books stapled inside it.
I mean, we didn't just like make them difficult to, we also made them really difficult to fit into magazines. I mean, we went for broke on this.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it
No, we
was,
have a bunch of stuff though, and most of it's not even been printed. So
yeah,
because
yeah,
we
we
start
got,
these things, we have like a half drawn full comic issue, and
Alex, you should keep on us to do it because we
yeah,
have
yeah,
it, we got it all up together and we would actually love to do it. So,
yeah, I would
and
love
we
to.
could, there's nothing stopping
If
us.
you think of a publisher that might want something like that, let us know.
Well, Alex just was involved in putting together a really beautiful book for Fantagraphics Underground called Hurricane Nancy. So
Yeah,
Oh,
he did it.
I didn't know Alex did that.
maybe that's something Alex should take on.
Dealt with Alex many times over the years. He interviewed us on all kinds of stuff. So yeah.
Hey,
Forrest has a
can I speak?
question, and I'd like to. I'll put Forrest. Forrest, it seems like you want to come on screen.
Is he there?
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just hit done. Done speak. Can I speak?
Yes.
Can
Yes.
you?
We can hear you.
I don't know if you can see me or not. This is Neil
Yes.
Martinson.
Yeah. I don't know
Oh,
why Neil here. Let me mute Neil, or Neil. Maybe you can mute yourself. And then Forrest
all
should
right.
come prominently on screen. Let me try again. It's Zoom drives me crazy. Okay, so Neil is muted now, and Forrest, let me just unmute yourself, and then you should be able to pop on screen.
Okay, great.
Great, there you
Hello,
are.
everyone.
Hi.
Perfect.
I want to say, I'm 44 now. I read this when I was 16, and it was so mind-blowing. A friend brought it to class, and I was a comic freak. I probably owned an issue of 8 Ball or something at that point, but this was so different than anything I'd ever seen. It was shocking, deeply, deeply shocking. And I think at the same time, I had seen like the hardcore collections on VHS, but it was still a couple years before I started to put together who David was in relation to this book and
Oh, you mean
these other ways.
The Kern collections?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and this is more of a comment, this first part, but like something, I've read things where people talk about like the potential of comic books, the potential to do things that other things can't do. And seeing a spread like this is so David. Like it's so his words come to life in a way that is like I don't think it'd be explored in any other forum, any other medium.
Yeah.
It's so incredible. But my question is kind of apart from this, and it's for Marguerite, where I know that you were in Where Evil Dwells, and I was curious about your part in that, how involved you were, or how what the time period was like to just kind of general
What a question.
overview.
Well, they came and picked me up. And I had the baby, of course. So, and
I elected not to go to this freaking thing.
yeah, so I took the baby out in the stroller, and of course, we get there, and yeah, Tommy grabs him. I mean, Tommy Turner. I love Tommy dearly, but he's quite a character. Anyway, he's in some sort of weird outfit, and he grabs the baby and runs off with the baby. And I really was surprised that he did that. I didn't know that was coming, so I wasn't acting. I was freaked out. And then it was like all the explosions started happening. And again, Tommy saying to me, "Don't
It's
worry,
survival
don't
research
worry." David was like, "Don't worry, survival research lab," and we nearly had them in our gallery. Boom, boom. And I'm like, holy God, I've got a child here. What the hell? But it was a really fun day, And I went off and I was off with Marcus Leatherdale somewhere because it was like it's like all tip, like the destroyed stuff out there, buildings and whatnot. So we went off and we were taking pictures, and that was a pretty yeah, it was a great day where evil dwells, you know. But it was epic, and it didn't get enough, the shot with the with the train where everybody's tied up upside down. There's Tessa Hughes Friedland, she's bandaged up, Michael Carter's bandaged up. They're hanging upside down from that train. That's a definite David vision, right? The train thing, So that was a motif of his that
It's a very ambitious film, like sort of
my
Fellini-esque.
God, it was huge. I mean, we're all out there doing this thing. It was a pretty complex set of shots going on. Yeah, it was amazing. It was an amazing thing to be part of. Yeah.
Yikes.
I had the privilege of driving out there and back with those guys. I'm like,
You're in the IMDb for that, Marguerite.
I know I am.
Jesus. Really, you pulled that one out from wherever for
Yeah,
us.
well, we tried to make a movie with Tommy later on, but then he was
He gets a little stabby, like, hey, Tommy, could you lighten up with the stabby shit? Like, what is going on? Holy
stab
man.
everybody, Tommy. So,
You should get one of those, you see those dolls for your dogs where it looks like they're running along stabbing. Tommy should have one of those full size.
Tommy's like, I'm going to kill everybody at the end. I'd written this great script and it was about murders. So, I mean, it was already had blood and gore in it. And at the end of it, Tommy's like, Tommy was going to be our director. And I'm now wondering what the fuck I was thinking. Excuse, I just cursed about this one. And Tommy was like, I'm going to kill them all at the end. I was like,
Yeah.
no, Tom, no, we're not killing everybody at the end. It's like not the point of the movie to kill everybody. It was
He's like, I just want to stab.
ways. We had to part ways for a minute. We'd been in rehearsal for a month. We were in
That's why
rehearsal.
we didn't make the other film, because he wanted to stab everybody at the end. Tommy, what's up with the stabbing, man? Okay, get some help. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Did you
thanks for
actually
that question,
see
Forrest. I
that?
think that was a great interlude to from talking so much about 7 miles a second. I is there anyone else who has a question?
What happened to Neil?
Hey there, guys. Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. There's Neil.
Yeah.
Where's your head?
I don't know. I don't know why it's not working. But as long as you can hear me,
I can hear.
Yes.
good to see you guys.
Yeah.
And
Almost to hear you.
yeah, and thanks to Austin for putting this together. It's such an amazing book, and I'm glad. I think more people should know about it. I was very close with you guys and Crosby, and I met David through you, and I was present for the creation and the production of the book. And I remember you guys going out to Brussels and coming back with books by Book and
Yeah.
that gorgeous magician's nephew and Schuiten and I was very aware of the
Oh, I showed those to David, and that was one of the few things that he actually saw was the Book, Billy
Yeah.
Buck BGB, and the issue of Akira where Neo
Right.
York explodes.
yeah
Those
gorgeous
are the things I showed to David, and also Kirby's New Gods thing.
right. But there's the Kirby and the Steranko influence in your graphic work, but the two of you working together, the work is so incredibly sophisticated and draws on so many different traditions of elliptical literary traditions and like you were saying, semiotics and all this stuff. And it just strikes me that the fact that El Vibora, which I remember sitting and looking at you with in my
Yeah.
loft where you guys stayed, and I was just thinking that they were the first people to publish that stuff. Do you guys have connections in Europe? It just strikes with this book you did a few years ago about Marguerite's life and the gorgeous and the thing, the New York thing about the drowned New York. All that stuff strikes me as, I mean,
Well,
just
we
I
did,
think immensely European
yeah, we
in
did
its sensibility. So I'm just wondering if there's a European publisher or somebody who would actually do justice and
Yeah,
give
we
you
did
guys.
we did a French 7 miles a second and a French late child with the same publisher, but we weren't very happy with
Yeah.
how it came out in the end. And it's very difficult to tell what's going on over there. I have some Spanish publishers that I like, and I want to get a Spanish
So you
edition.
have no idea how they were received or anything?
Well, they don't communicate. So, it's like,
Right.
I'd like to find another French
I
publisher
was
that's
told that we
actually.
were getting no publicity, and when we went to Angoulême, we were sitting on the train. The guy next to us was reading this magazine with like a
You're,
double
You're breaking
page, like
up.
3 or 4 spreads of 7 months. Oh, I said, so there was some stuff published in Europe in reviews and whatnot, and we didn't know about it. We were literally sitting on the train, and a guy had a magazine with spreads, and we were like, wait, what
Yeah, it
is
was
that?
fabulous. Well, there's all these reviews, but our publisher wasn't telling us about them. So, it's just like we had no communication. It just wasn't the right
And they
publisher.
didn't let me translate myself, which, I've now told you I'm just French.
Yeah, you should translate it yourself.
I could have translated it myself and done a better job. And
It's a little hard when you're in America to try to deal with European, but at least we have the rights to these things, so we can try to do that. And yeah, I'd like to, and I would like to do a Ground Zero too. And
I just wanted to say, you guys are like real American masters. There's nobody around that's really doing anything like what you guys have achieved, and I'm sure what's coming is going to be even more exciting. So I just wanted to say that it's great to see you guys here on Zoom, and I miss you terribly, and I'm looking forward to
well, you're
seeing
a
you again,
wonderful
whatever
artist.
you do
Yes,
next.
you too.
Love you.
There's some lovely faces and voices here, so thank you very much for coming because it's lovely to hear from some of you all that we don't know and new friends. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I think that's a really nice note to end things on. You guys have really given us it's almost 2 hours that you guys have
Has it
given us
been?
here. It's really appreciated. I really I know you've participated in the symposium before, but I really do want this book highlighted as much as possible. And I really thank you for I thank you for participating in this. And I really
Well, I
encourage.
can point out you can also get the book from Domino Books,
Oh
which is
wow.
often
We got to separate church and state here a little bit, but that's true. Yes, it's a
and
book
your
all.
work. I had to mention that your work has this quality of when you're looking at it. I don't know. I tend to linger and go around and around and around in a vortex until like my head is spinning,
Oh
because
wow.
your drawings are like a miasma of inscrutable portent.
Well, that's sweet of you to say, but you're gonna make me blush. If that is, yeah,
No,
maybe
it's
that's
awesome.
not even a compliment. Who knows?
No, I know.
Really, Gary.
I have to order your book, which is
Oh
what I
well,
thank you, Ed.
but
Yes,
it was really a pleasure, and yeah, thank you guys so much. And anyone who hasn't read the book, I encourage you to go to groundzerobooks.com and get a copy. And if you have it already, it's rereading it this week was really special. So I encourage you guys to unearth your older copy if you haven't done so recently. So thank you guys so much. And next week for the symposium, we will have an incredible cartoonist, Anna Hayfish, zooming in from Germany and discussing her work. So don't miss
Oh,
that one. But
awesome. Thank you so much for having us.
oh,
And
thank you. It's a
so
and
much.
pleasure.
James and I talking over each other. I know it's a lot to manage, so I thank you
That was
doubly.
the best part. That was the best part.
All right, you guys.
All right, bye, you guys, and
All
Bye.
thanks Trevor for
Thank
asking
you.
questions.
right. Peace
Bye,
out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Austin.
bye.